Mark Douglas did not die with trading secrets. He died frustrated, frustrated because he had given the world everything it needed to trade consistently, and the world kept looking past it toward the next indicator, the next setup, the next shortcut. So let me say what he said plainly, without softening it. You will never trade consistently until you accept, at a cellular level, that you cannot know what any individual trade will do. Not probably, not likely, cannot. And the moment you genuinely accept that, not intellectually but emotionally, everything about how you trade will change. That is the hidden truth. It was never hidden. We just didn't want to hear it. I want to sit with that for a moment because most people hear it and nod. They think they already know it. They've read the books, they've watched the videos, they understand that trading is a probability game. But understanding something in your mind and having it settle into your bones are two completely different experiences. Mark knew this. He talked about it constantly in the last years of his life, and it was the source of his frustration. He had written Trading in the Zone. He had spelled it out chapter by chapter, and traders were still calling him, still emailing him, still showing up at his seminars with the same wound. They knew what to do and couldn't do it. The knowledge wasn't the problem. The integration was. So let's talk about what integration actually means, because this is the heart of everything. When I say your mind needs to be indifferent to the outcome of any single trade, I am not talking about not caring. I am not talking about emotional flatness or some kind of meditative detachment from the world. What I'm describing is something more precise than that something Mark called a probabilistic mindset. It means genuinely experiencing each trade as one instance in a long series of outcomes, where no single instance carries more weight than any other. The way a casino experiences each hand of blackjack, the way an insurance company experiences each claim. They don't need any particular outcome, they need the distribution to hold. And because they need the distribution and not the outcome, they are free to execute perfectly every single time. Think about what that freedom actually looks like. The casino dealer doesn't freeze before flipping the next card. He doesn't second-guess the rules of blackjack mid-hand. He doesn't start telling himself that this particular table is different, that these particular players have a special energy tonight, that maybe he should bend the rules just this once because he has a feeling. He executes, consistently, mechanically, because the outcome of this hand is irrelevant to him. What matters is the process, applied correctly, over thousands of hands. That is what Mark was pointing at. That is what consistent trading looks like from the inside. Not excitement, not drama, not pride when you win and shame when you lose. Just process. Just execution. Just one trade following another in a long, unbroken chain where each link looks identical because the behavior that creates each link is identical. Now, here's where it gets painful, because most traders are not built this way. Not yet. And the reason isn't intelligence. The reason isn't discipline in the way people normally think about discipline. The reason is that the human nervous system was not designed for probabilistic thinking. It was designed for survival. It was designed to find patterns, to assign meaning to outcomes, to learn from individual events. Because in the ancestral environment, individual events mattered enormously. One bad berry could kill you. One wrong move could end everything. The brain learned to treat single outcomes as significant data points about the world, and it still does. Even when you're sitting in front of a trading platform, even when you rationally understand that a single losing trade means nothing, your nervous system doesn't know that. Your nervous system experiences the loss of money as a threat. It floods you with cortisol. It tells you to do something, fix something, act. And the worst trading decisions in history have been made in that state. This is why Mark said what he said. This is why he was frustrated. Because the gap between knowing and being is not bridged by more knowledge. It's bridged by a different kind of practice. And most of the trading education industry is built on the wrong side of that gap, selling more knowledge to people who already have enough knowledge and desperately need something else instead. Let me tell you about a trader. I'll call him Michael. Michael had studied technical analysis for 3 years before he ever funded a live account. He could read a chart the way A musician reads sheet music fluently, quickly, with genuine insight. He had back-tested his system over 5 years of data. The results were solid. A 61% win rate, a risk-reward ratio of 1 to 2, a maximum drawdown of 12%. By any objective measure, Michael had an edge. He knew he had an edge. He had the spreadsheets to prove it. He funded a $20,000 account and started trading. Within 4 months, the account was at $11,000. Not because the system had failed. The system was performing almost exactly as the backtest predicted. Michael had failed. He had been cutting his winners short because the anxiety of watching an open profit shrink was unbearable. He'd been letting his losers run because closing a losing trade felt like admitting he was wrong, and being wrong felt like a statement about his intelligence, his worth, his entire identity as a trader. He had been skipping signals after losing streaks because 3 losses in a row had convinced him on a visceral, irrational level that something had broken, that the edge was gone, that the next trade was somehow more likely to lose than the data suggested. None of this was logical. All of it was human. Michael came to Mark's work not looking for a new strategy. He came looking for something to fix the gap between what he knew and what he could execute. And what Mark showed him was this. The gap wasn't a knowledge problem. It was a belief problem. Michael believed, somewhere beneath his rational mind, that he needed each trade to work. He needed the winner because he was afraid of what another loss would mean. He needed to be right because his self-image was tangled up in his performance. And that need, that desperate, invisible, unconscious need, was the thing destroying his account, one perfectly reasonable-looking decision at a time. Now, I want to stop here. I want to stop the ideas for a moment and just speak to you directly, because I think some of you are listening to this and you're nodding along, and part of you is thinking, yes, that's the other traders. Those are the people who have the psychological problems. I'm different. I'm more disciplined than that. This isn't really about me. And I want to ask you something honestly. When was the last time you closed a trade early, not because your rules told you to, not because your stop was hit, not because anything in your system said to get out, but because the anxiety in your chest got too loud to ignore? When was the last time you held a losing position past your stop because you told yourself it would come back? It just needs a little more time. I'll give it just a few more minutes. When was the last time a losing streak made you change something about your approach? Not because the data supported the change, but because you needed to feel like you were doing something, fixing something, taking control of something that felt out of control? I'm not asking those questions to shame you. I'm asking them because the honest answer is the beginning of everything. The honest answer is where the work actually starts. So here's a practice. And I want you to treat this as a tool you now own, not homework someone is assigning you. After your next trade, before you look at whether it made money or lost money, before you check your balance, before you do anything, take out a piece of paper or open a notes app and ask yourself one question. Did I follow my process exactly? Not approximately, not mostly, exactly. Did I enter where my rules said to enter? Did I size the position the way my rules say to size it? Did I place my stop where my rules say it goes? Did I manage the trade the way my plan says to manage it? And then give yourself a score from 1 to 10 based purely on process adherence. The result of the trade, whether it won or lost, is completely irrelevant to the score. A perfectly executed losing trade gets a 10. A sloppily executed winner gets a 2. Do this for 20 trades. Just 20. What you will find, almost without exception, is that your process scores and your emotional state during the trade are far more correlated than your process scores and your actual outcomes. The trades where you deviated, where anxiety or greed or impatience pulled you off your rules, those are the trades you feel worst about, regardless of whether they made money. The trades where you executed perfectly clean entry, correct size, stop in place, hands off, those are the trades you feel best about, regardless of the result. And slowly, over 20 trades, your nervous system begins to reorganize around a new definition of success. Not profit, process. That reorganization is the beginning of consistency. Let me go deeper now, because there are things Mark said about consistent trading that most people never fully absorb. The first one is this: the market does not know you exist. I mean that literally. There is no force in the price action that is responding to your hope, your fear, your analysis, your confidence, or your need. The market is a collective expression of millions of decisions made by millions of participants, most of whom have never heard of you and never will. When price moves against your position, it is not punishing you. When it moves in your favor, it is not rewarding you. It is simply doing what it does, which is expressing the aggregate behavior of everyone who touched it in that moment. This sounds obvious, but sit with it. Really sit with it. Because if the market doesn't know you exist, then your losses are not statements about your worth. They are not evidence of your incompetence. They are not omens about what's coming next. They are just outcomes in a probability distribution, as impersonal as a coin flip, as neutral as the weather. Mark used to say that traders give the market a personality it doesn't have. They talk about the market tricking them, hunting their stops, punishing them for getting greedy, and he understood the impulse. It feels that way sometimes. It genuinely does. But the moment you assign personality to price action, you've started a war you cannot win. Because now every loss is a personal attack, and you're going to respond to personal attacks the way humans respond to personal attacks: defensively, emotionally, irrationally. The market doesn't care about your response, but your account does. The second thing Mark said that cuts deep is this: the need to be right is the single most expensive habit a trader can have. More expensive than a bad system, more expensive than poor risk management, more expensive than overtrading or undertrading or any of the other tactical errors that trading coaches spend so much time on. Because the need to be right reaches into every single decision you make and warps it toward ego preservation rather than performance. It makes you hold losers because closing them means admitting you were wrong. It makes you cut winners because a smaller profit locked in feels safer than the vulnerability of holding for the full target. It makes you revenge trade after a loss because you need to prove to yourself, to the market, to no one in particular, that you are not someone who loses. And the bitter irony is that the need to be right is what most reliably makes you wrong. Here's a second practice to add to the first one. Before you enter any trade, ask yourself 3 questions. First, do I genuinely believe this setup has an edge based on my data? Second, am I okay with this trade losing? Not hoping it won't, not reassuring myself that it will win, actually okay with it losing, the way I'm okay with a coin flip coming up tails. Third, if this trade loses, will I be able to look at it in a week and say that the entry was correct given my rules, regardless of the outcome? If you can answer yes to all 3 questions with honesty, enter the trade. If you can't, don't, and sit with why you can't. Because the answer to that question is more valuable than any trade you could possibly take. This pre-trade check is not about filtering out losses. Losses are inevitable and irrelevant. It's about filtering out ego-driven entries, the trades you take not because your system says to, but because you need something from the market. Revenge, validation, excitement, proof. Those are the trades that kill accounts. Not bad setups, bad psychology wearing the mask of a setup. Now, let's talk about what Mark called the zone, because I think it's one of the most misunderstood concepts he ever introduced, and it matters enormously for what we're building here. Most traders who have read about the zone imagine it as a state of emotional numbness, a kind of cold, robotic detachment where you stop caring about anything. And that's not it. That's not even close. The zone is not the absence of emotion. It's the absence of conflict. It's the state you enter when your beliefs about trading are so consistent with the reality of trading that there's no friction between what you expect and what you experience. When you genuinely believe at the emotional level, not just the intellectual level, that each trade is simply one instance in a probability distribution, that losses are a normal and expected part of any edge, that no individual outcome has any bearing on the validity of your approach, then losses don't generate conflict. They don't generate the defensive, irrational cascade of responses that most traders know so well. They just register as information and pass through without sticking. That's the zone, not numbness, alignment. And here's the hardest truth about losing streaks, which is really the final piece of the puzzle Mark spent his life assembling. Losing streaks do not cause trading problems. Let me say that again more carefully. A losing streak is not what destroys a trader. What destroys a trader is the belief that a losing streak means something beyond what the statistics would predict. Because every edge produces losing streaks. Every single one. A system with a 60% win rate will produce 5, 6, 7 consecutive losses with predictable regularity. That is not a malfunction. That is what a 60% win rate looks like in the real world, over real time, with real randomness in the distribution. The trader who understands this at the bone level keeps executing during the losing streak. The trader who believes the losing streak means something, that the edge is gone, that the market has changed, that they need to fix something right now, that trader starts deviating. And the deviation is what turns a normal losing streak into an account-blowing event. It's never the losses that kill you. It's the response to the losses. And the response is always driven by belief. So here is what I want to leave you with. Here is what Mark Douglas was trying to give the world in those final years, and what I believe he wanted to be remembered for more than anything else. Consistent profitability is not a technical achievement. It is a psychological one. It is the product of a specific set of beliefs, held not theoretically, but experientially, at the level of the nervous system itself. The belief that each trade is independent of the last. The belief that losses are information, not verdicts. The belief that process is what you control and outcome is what the probability distribution decides. The belief that you don't need any particular trade to work, and because of that, every trade gets your clearest, calmest, most precise execution. These beliefs are not installed by reading. They are built by practice, by the outcome detachment journal, by the pre-trade belief check, by 20 trades of scoring process and ignoring result, by showing up to the same market, with the same rules, with the same calm day after day, loss after loss, win after win, until the pattern of behavior becomes the pattern of belief. Mark spent 30 years trying to close the gap between what traders know and what they can actually do. He didn't get to see as many of them close it as he wanted to, but the map he left is complete. Every answer is in the work he left behind. The question was never whether the information was available. The question was always whether you were willing to do something harder than learning whether you were willing to change. So here is your mantra. Say it slowly and mean it. My edge plays out over time. No single trade can define me, and no single trade can break me. Say that before every session. Write it on a card next to your monitor. Let it become the lens through which you experience every outcome, good or bad, expected or surprising. Because when it truly becomes your lens, when it stops being a sentence you repeat and starts being something you actually feel, that is when everything Mark Douglas talked about begins to be real for you. If this video shifted something in the way you see trading, not just in your mind, but somewhere a little deeper than that, then consider subscribing. Not for the channel, not for the numbers, but as a small, concrete act of commitment to the version of yourself that actually wants to make this change. The one who is willing to do the harder work, the one who has heard this before, and this time wants it to stick. That version of you deserves to keep learning. And that is the only reason the subscribe button matters. And I want to expand on one more thing before we close, because I think it's the piece that most people leave out when they talk about Mark's work. They talk about probabilistic thinking. They talk about process over outcome. They talk about the zone. But they rarely talk about what Mark called defining your edge. And by that, he didn't mean identifying a setup with a positive expectancy. He meant something much more personal than that. He meant understanding, with real specificity, what conditions produce your best trading, not just statistically, but psychologically. Because here's what nobody tells you. The same setup traded by you at 10 in the morning when you're rested and clear-headed, and traded by you at 3 in the afternoon after you've already had 2 losses and you're tired and irritable, is not the same trade. The chart pattern might be identical. Your execution won't be. Your psychology won't be. And the outcome distribution will reflect that difference, even if you can't see it clearly in the moment. Mark was deeply interested in self-knowledge as a trading tool. Not self-knowledge in the abstract philosophical sense, not navel-gazing, not journaling about your feelings for the sake of it, but self-knowledge in the very practical sense of knowing exactly when you are and are not in a state to trade well. Knowing that after 3 consecutive losses, you enter a state where your judgment is compromised and your decisions become subtly distorted by the need to recover. Knowing that on days when you slept poorly, you have a tendency to either overtrade or to be too cautious, depending on how the first hour goes. Knowing that certain market conditions, high volatility news events, for instance, put you in an emotional state that looks like confidence but is actually closer to recklessness. This is edge definition at the psychological level. And it is just as important as the technical definition of your edge, maybe more so. The traders who truly internalize what Mark taught don't just have a system, they have a system plus a self-model. They know their system's tendencies, and they know their own tendencies, and they manage the intersection of the two with the same rigor they would apply to any other variable in their trading. When their self-model says the conditions aren't right, when they know from experience that they are not in the right state to execute, they don't trade. Not because they're afraid, not because they lack confidence, but because they understand that trading when your psychology is compromised is not brave, and it is not committed, and it is not evidence of discipline. It is statistically equivalent to switching to a worse system, and no serious trader would voluntarily switch to a worse system just because the market is open. This is the maturity that consistent trading requires, and it is the maturity that Mark was really pointing at with all of his work. Not the maturity of a rigid disciplinarian who follows rules out of fear of breaking them. The maturity of someone who understands deeply enough what they're doing that the rules feel like expressions of wisdom rather than constraints on freedom. When you genuinely understand why a daily stop loss protects you, not just intellectually, not just because someone told you it does, but because you have felt in your body what happens when you trade without one, you don't experience the rule as a limitation. You experience it as a friend. The same is true of every principle in Mark's work. The goal was never compliance. The goal was comprehension deep enough that compliance becomes unnecessary because the right behavior becomes the natural behavior. That's what Mark Douglas was building toward. That's what he wanted for every trader he ever spoke to. Not traders who knew the rules, traders who had become the rules traders for whom the probabilistic mindset wasn't a technique they were applying, but a truth they had absorbed so completely that it shaped every moment of their experience at the screen. He didn't get to see as many people arrive at that place as he wanted to, but the path is there. It has always been there. And it begins with a single honest admission that knowing is not the same as being, and that being is what this was always actually about.